This marshmallow test thing's interesting, right? Because I'm on East Coast time. If somebody put a cookie in front of me right now, I would eat it in a nanosecond, right? Um, I can't remember exactly when Sam got in touch with me. It's probably in August or September, and he said, "Bob, I want you to come out and I want you to do a TED talk at this meeting we're going to have. It's going to be the Learning 2 conference." And I'm not focused on it a lot. I'm thinking Sam's asking, so I'm going to go do this thing. And he said, "I want slides in early January." So in early December, I started thinking about this. And I called, our communication person. I said, "I've got to do a TED talk in California in January." And she said, "TED talk? This is huge. I mean, I'm going to have to call in a lot of chits here. You got to do certain specs. It requires certain ratios. You have to have certain kind of borders." I'm thinking, I mean, the woman knows her job. This is a little over-determined, I think, but this is probably something that she can figure out. And then I'm doing a call with the board in early December, and we have board in-person meetings, but in December we have a conference call. And primary purpose is to update the board on the budget for the next year, get approval, and also tell them a few things we're going to be doing. And so I'm telling them a few things. I'm going to, and then we're going to do this TED Talk thing in California. And one of the people that's on the call says, "TED Talk? This is huge." And I'm starting. So next day I emailed Sam, and I said, "Sam, TED Talk?" And he said, "Yeah, see, I'm one of the 5 people in America that doesn't have a clue what a TED Talk is at this point." So Sam says, "Well, no, TED-like talk about it. This is a TED-like. So this is going to be a TED-like talk. It's going to be about the work that this foundation has been doing for the last 9 years. So a word on foundations. Foundations have been exploding. Foundations, in 1995, I looked it up, there was 621,000 of them. In 2011, there was 1.2 million foundations. That means that, in theory, we've got a lot more resources to do the work that we need to be doing. That's the good news. The bad news is we've got at least 1.2 million people that never thought that they had a bad idea, right? So this is not necessarily a good thing. Paul Brest, who is just retired as president of the Hewlett Foundation, wrote about this. He said when he was dean of the law school at Stanford, he had bad ideas every day. He would wake up in the morning and students would tell him he had bad ideas, and faculty would tell him he had bad ideas, and he'd go home at night and his wife and kids would tell him he had bad ideas. And he would go to the foundation, and for 10 years, Paul never had a bad idea, right? So I'm going to retire at the end of this summer, and I'm going to start having bad ideas again. And I thought that maybe I would try and get out in front of the curve a little bit on this, before everybody starts talking about the bad ideas we've had for the last 10 years. I'd start talking a little bit about the bad ideas we've had for the last 10 years. So I'm going to tell you some things about the bad ideas we had. I'm going to tell you a little bit about, if I had stayed there another 10 years, some of the ideas about things we might have done differently. Because I would have been in the foundation world, those would be very good ideas. So you can rest assured that anything like that will be a good idea. Like many of these processes, our work in after school began with a strategic planning process. Now you have to understand strategic planning in foundations is not exactly like it is in your organizations, because people in foundations don't have bad ideas. So what a strategic planning process is in a foundation is you wrap some process around a set of activities so that by the end you get to a point that you knew you were going to get to when you started, right? So foundations are famous for this kind of strategic planning, and at least in our defense, we didn't take a tremendous amount of time. We began our strategic process in December 2002, and we ended it in December 2002. It went a little bit like this. We were trying to align our work in advocacy and communication and program development work, which is about, 20% of our budget, around a common topic, because we felt that we were, an inch wide and a mile wide and an inch deep on that kind of stuff. And most of our work is, as Jennifer was saying, is in research. So we decided we were going to choose a topic to align it around. And we were having a board conversation, and the board chair turns to me and he said, "Well, this really makes sense to me, Bob, that we would choose a topic, and give us some ideas about what those topics would be." And I said, "Well, we've got some work on child welfare and the transition to independence, so that might be something we do some work on." And We've got some work on teaching in the public schools, and that might be something. And we've been doing some work in out-of-school time, and that might. And he stops and he says, we got after-school programs in Phoenix. I like after-school programs. Why don't we do that? And I look at the guy and I think, chair of the board of a foundation, he doesn't have bad ideas, right? So we decided that that's what we're going to do. The first thing that we had to do was we had to spend some money. And we indeed were able to spend some money across the last 9 years. The good idea about how we spent money was this alignment thing. We spent, as Jennifer was implying, millions. We spent about $20 million. And we spent it in 4 categories. And here's the percentages that you're going to see. We had 14% that was being spent on advocacy, 12% on capacity building, 12% on communication, about 62% on research. If you double those things and add $1 million to them, you get about the right amount of money. So 62%, about $12.4 million, right? The other thing that we did was I spent a lot of my time trying to work the issue. I have spent time with many of the people in this audience, much to my education, and it has caused me to think about some things differently for sure than we thought about them when we were going in. As a research funder, one of the things that you have to think about is you have to think if you're going into an area and you're thinking about trying to influence the quality of programs, you do need a definition of what the quality of programs is. And I love these lists, right? I mean, we've got this list in the postcard. So the list that we had at that time was something that Jane called out, this list from the National Academy of Sciences report that Reed Larson done. It had 8 things. I, just like Sam, I made little wallet cards. I laminated those wallet cards, 8 features of positive developmental settings. I gave them to our board members. I said, stick them in your wallets or your purses. And when I say quality of after-school programs, pull those things out. And, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about places where kids feel like they matter and where they're active and where they're emotionally and physically safe and so on. And the genius of that list in 2000 was that Reed actually had developed it by looking at what constitutes a healthy household. It had nothing to do with an after-school program. And so the genius of the list, like many people have been saying today, is that it doesn't really only apply to out-of-school time structured activities. It applies equally well to our homes when we're on our better days as parents. It applies to the classrooms that our kids are in. It applies to the neighborhoods that our kids are developing in and the rest of it. They need to be safe. They need to be places where kids feel like they matter. They need to be places where kids are involved in meaningful activities. I will tell you, I think we're now overlisted, right? I'm done with lists. They're important to have. I like Sam's because there's only 5. You had 8 on this original thing. You got 5 on the learning and after school and summer programs list. There's a new paper out that Robert Halpern and Reed Larson and Paul Heckman, different Heckman from UC Davis wrote. There's 11 features of essential effective learning environments in that one. Now here's where we get sort of TED Talk-like. I actually ran the list through a Wordle. And this is the Larson and Heckman and Halpern list. And so you can see sort of what's going on, right? It's young people and it's learning. Then I went and I took the learning and after school and summer programs list and I ran that through Wordle. So it's young people and it's learning and it's, motivation and it's all that kind of stuff, right? Not that these aren't important things, but we're not going to spend a whole lot more time at the foundation, nor do I think in the field debating about what it is that kids need. The lists have got it for us, right? Then, second thing comes along. After the list, we had to figure out some way of measuring those lists. We had a meeting in early 2000 where the campfire people and the 4-H folks and the 21st century people and other people came in, and they all had these rubrics or they had these measures of what constituted quality. And every person in that room was sold on the fact that their thing was really unique and different, right? I mean, camps are so different than 4-H programs, are so different than schools, are so different than 21st century community learning center programs. Not so. Those lists, all these things are measures of what those lists are doing, right? So we funded Nicole Yahalem, who you're going to hear from next, to actually pull some of those measures together. This is a volume that's on the Forum for Youth Investment website. There's a set of the measures that are there, some that bubbled up from practice, some that came from research, measuring youth program quality. And I can guarantee you that every person that developed one of those measures thought that it was different than any of the rest of them. And when Nicole and her colleagues tried to figure out whether that was true or not, they got this picture. And all the tools measured the degree to which the setting was meaningful, and the degree to which the setting was emotionally supportive, and the degree to which the setting was well managed and, psychologically safe and physically safe, and the rest of it. You do get, and you can't see it here, you can see it if you pull up that publication, you get some difference. Some of these measures, the APT measures a little more in administration than the YPQA. I spent probably 2 years in California trying to convince the state that you didn't need to go out and develop a whole new measure for California, to no avail at all. I would hear that, I heard this joke earlier about Stockton and Oakland, and we was like, well, the kids in Yosemite are so different than the kids in Chico that we really do need to have a different kind of measure. I'm not convinced of that. So measures, good idea. More measures, not such a good idea. The other thing that my travels convinced me of is that if you're a research funder, you better figure out ways of connecting research and practice. We had a bad idea. The bad idea was researchers go off and figure things out and then, quotes, disseminate them or translate them to practice. It's a model that doesn't work. You end up with a lot of broken tools that you can't figure out how to run. You end up with a lot of curriculum ideas that just don't make a whole lot of sense when you put them in real-life settings. So what we've been thinking about at the foundation is a much more bi-directional thing, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a second, but a much more bi-directional thing that involves practitioners articulating the real problems of practice and then working with researchers or evaluator types in a disciplined kind of way to sort out what might be some ways to make some positive improvements on that sort of thing. As we've thought about trying to, actually, I will tell you a story. We were first interested in policy. We got some policy people here, and we got some practitioners, and a lot of practitioners in the audience. The policy thing was sexy, right? If you're going to do research and you want to connect it to something, you want to connect it first to policy. Policy moves stuff around. I have become convinced that if there's any occupational group that is less influenced by research findings than policymakers, I have no idea who they are, right? Policymakers use research. It's a little bit like that strategic planning process in the foundation, right? I know where I want to go. Frank, go find me something that shows that I ought to be going there, right? So that's how research gets used in politics. In practice, on the other hand, people are faced every day with real problems that they're trying to solve, and they are very open. If you get some help with researchers and evaluators who are sensible folks and don't think that they know it all, in making some progress on some of that. We have then also been trying to think about, if you were trying to work these networks, how would you work them? It's an overwhelming thing for a foundation our size to think about taking on the United States, which is what we were trying to take on. As I have done work in this area, I will tell you just 3 key ideas. First key idea is that what you got to do if you're going to work this connection is work it through the intermediaries. The advocacy organizations, the technical assistance providers, the Temescal Associates, the partnerships, the citywide intermediaries, that's the way that information is probably going to flow in this field, in public education, in youth employment, in juvenile justice reform, and child welfare. There are intermediaries that are the interstitial glue between the people that are the funders, researchers, practitioners, all those various categories that Bob was calling out. Second thing is this stuff flows through relationships. We've heard it a number of times today. There is nothing more humbling than to send out an email and actually look at the stats about how many people opened it up, right? We send out our annual report. We got this cool stuff now where I know actually which of you opened up the annual report. Not only do I know that, but I know whether you are not clicked on that annual report essay about our work in after school. I have no idea after that whether you read it or not, but I know whether you clicked on it. So we send that annual report, I don't know, 4,000 people or something like that electronically. 629 people opened it up, right? And God knows how many, what a small subset actually read that essay about our work. So if you want to make change, you better be working the relationships, and you better be thinking about how to do that. Now, even having said that, it's a little overwhelming. So what you've got to realize is that relationships exist within networks. They exist within networks, and there are people within those networks that are the key nodes of the networks. And there's a lot of those kind of folks in this room. Now, as an exercise, once I knew I was coming out here, I had our tech people actually embed a little device within each one of your smartphones. And I started figuring out whom you were talking to and who was talking to whom and where those kind of nodes were. And I've used those data to draw a network of the State Department of Education, California State Department of Education, and everybody else in California. And that's the network right there, right? The folks up in the purple, that's the State Department of Education. The folks in the yellow over here, that's the rest of us that are in the room. That real big box there, that's Michael, right? You know, it's right up there. This real big box over here, that's Carla Sanger, right there. And I don't know who this person is in the middle, but, you know, we got to figure that out. There's one lonely soul that Michael hired over here who still identifies as a practitioner, been marginalized somewhere in the basement of the State Department of Education. The point is that if you're interested in working networks, you don't need to work everybody. You need to, these boxes actually are sized to represent the number of people that have said that when I go to somebody for information, I go to that person, and the larger the size is the better. All right, so with that information, a couple of thoughts about where we ought to be going. There's two slides that I want to talk about. One is I want us to go less on where we ought to be going and more on how to get there, right? Less on what is quality, less on how to measure quality, more on how to create quality. And as we do that, the bad idea, or at least an unproven idea, is this idea that you start small and scale it up. I'm much more drawn, frankly, to large attempts to try and work within larger systems where quality, in LA's best, there's some terrific centers and there's some centers that aren't as terrific. Within the terrific centers, there's some activities for kids that are stunning and there's some activities for kids that aren't stunning, right? So you get this variation across all of our work. And I think the best way to make some improvements here is to think about doing continuous improvement at scale rather than to try to smartphone and scale it up. Second idea is that as we think about this, we're going to have to think about the standards for that work. We're going to try and have to think about things like, well, what's an improvement? You know, if we've done something, we can see some changes. Is that making it better, or does that just seemingly mean that it's different? And as we do that, I think we're going to start to talk about things like, well, we tried it in 5 places. We got some interesting changes that our measures show are important. Then we tried it in 25. Then we tried it in 125. We got the same results each time. It seems like we're on to something that's probably going to make a difference. Last slide. The other thing that I think that we ought to be doing is worrying less about what works. I think we know what works, and more about under what conditions those kinds of things can work. People will talk to you about the conditions of kids. Conditions of programs are just as important. If you think about trying to start a new site, and you're going to embed an after-school or out-of-school time program within an existing CBO, there's got to be something about the management structure of that CBO, the resources that they have available to them, et cetera, that's going to have something to do with the effectiveness of those services when delivered. There's got to be something about the safety of the neighborhood that influences how often kids can get there and whether or not they can make it to the door on a continuous basis. So part of the research that we're going to be doing is less worrying about what works. I think we know more about under what conditions. As we do that, this is the group that I think that we need to pay the most attention to. We have in our work argued constantly that line staff are where everything happens. You know, that's where kids experience these programs. And in fact, it is true. And I have done a lot of work talking to the folks that are doctors and lawyers and Indian chiefs at the top of these systems. The heroes of this work on a daily basis are a lot of the folks that are sitting from this tier on up. They're the people that are program administrators and managers of these systems. They are the people that are going to stick around. We need to understand their lives. We need to understand the kind of decisions they're trying to make. And we need to do work that feeds them on a daily basis so that they can do good work. And with that, that's a TED-like presentation. Thank you very much.
So, some of you may know that Bob plans to retire later this year, and we're happy for him, but we're sad for all of us. But Sam and the whole Learning and After School and Summer work group wanted to be sure to give him a small token of our appreciation for his many years of support and resources and time and leadership. So we have a plaque that says, "Outstanding Leadership awarded to Robert Granger. Thanks for being a friend to the after-school movement, for asking the tough questions and funding the research to answer them."